Today is April 4th, 2016. My name is Gary Sieck. I'm in the Senior Physiologist Lounge in the San Diego Convention Center, where the annual meeting of the American Physiological Society is being held. Today I have the pleasure of and honor of interviewing Dr. Anna Taylor for the Society's Living History Project. Dr. Taylor has been an APS member since 1963. She is affiliated with the University of California, Los Angeles, where she served as my co-advisor for my doctoral thesis dissertation. Dr. Taylor's research has focused on a number of areas in neuroendocrinology, with an emphasis on neuroendocrine, neurobehavioral, and neuroimmune consequences of developmental insults, such as prenatal alcohol exposure and maternal stress. Anna, welcome to the Living History Project.
Thank you.
And thank you for agreeing to be interviewed for this series.
Okay.
If you are ready, I would like to ask you a few questions.
Sure.
You were
Well,
born.
it's good to see you
Yeah, it's
after
really
all
good to
these
see you.
years.
You were born in Vienna, Austria, between the world wars. Please tell us about your parents and your grandparents and their professions in Austria.
Well, my grandparents were Viennese, although one grandfather was from Poland, but the other three were from Vienna and or the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And my grandmother on my mother's side, Juliet Beck, was the just before the end of World War I, was the dressmaker for the court. She was the dressmaker for Princess Valerie. And she and my mother, my grandmother and my mother, traveled to throughout the Austro-Hungarian Empire, particularly going to beaches, but also going to Paris, and where they would sit and copy fashions and bring them back to the dress salon in Vienna. And I was actually in utero during my mother's last trip to Paris in 1933. So, and my father, well, we were middle class folks. Fortunately, lived out in one of the suburban parts of Vienna rather than downtown, so we avoided the all the goings on with the takeover of Vienna and Austria by the Nazis. But my father had served as a lieutenant in the Austrian army in the Dolomites in World War I, where he lost an eye. He graduated as a mechanical engineer from the Technische Hochschule of the University of Vienna, and in 1922 he established a bicycle factory called Fulgur, which in German is the word for lightning. And he held on to that factory. It was very successful until it was absconded by the Nazis in 1938. At which point, well, we had visas to come to America, at least the initial ones were there, supported by a philanthropic family from Detroit, who actually happened to be customers of my grandmother. The American customers who came through in 1933 on their annual visits to Europe, warned us about the problems. They had been in Germany, and they said, we definitely need to leave, but nobody was leaving. And then finally, when in June of '38, all the Jews had to list their properties with the Gestapo, even down to the last silver teaspoon, which was, and those records are available. Fortunately, the Nazis kept good records, and I have all the inventories that every member of my family that I was able to get from the Austrian state archives. Well, in October of '38, my father was imprisoned. Fortunately, he was able to get out in 10 days, whereas a cousin, a very prominent doctor in Vienna, never got out, and he made it through all the concentration camps in Europe. Well, he got out, and when he got out, he said, "We're leaving," so we left Christmas 1938, and we're in Rotterdam. I remember the Christmas tree in Rotterdam, came on the boat, Holland America Lines, the Noordam, and landed in New York January 1st, '39.
So you were about 5 years old
Yes.
at the time.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
And we went to nursery. So my mother threw us into nursery school, which was good insofar as we learned English, my brother and I, but contacted a few of nursery school problems like lice,
Oh, yeah.
and I had a tonsillectomy, and that was an overnight procedure. And I remember coming out of the hospital, don't remember which hospital, dressed in one of my mother or my grandmother's nice creations, but totally bald from the lice. And then, and my brother had scarlet fever and a mastoidectomy, but he did very well with that, and fortunately.
So you made your way to Cleveland.
Well, my father got a job in Cleveland,
Okay.
as in fact in a bicycle factory, the Murray, Ohio bicycle factory. He was a draftsman for them. And he went in March. In the meantime, we had these problems, nursery school problems and health problems in New York. And finally, in June of '39, we moved to Cleveland to join him.
Yeah. So what was Cleveland like at that time?
Well, Cleveland was fine. We were in the inner city, the Glenville area, and not Cleveland Heights or Shaker Heights, but the Cleveland Public Schools were excellent,
Yeah.
and they had a program for gifted children called Major Work, which my brother and I qualified for, and that program enabled us to study, it was a very advanced curriculum. We did reports, we did talks, and we had French every day. And also we went to summer school at Western Reserve, a demonstration school for foreign languages, and took French. So it was very helpful. And
I was interested in how you found your way academically, and it wasn't a direct path, but you finally found your strength in science and math.
I avoided it. I fought it, but no, my mother thought I should go into art because taking art classes at the Cleveland Museum of Art. I wanted to do languages with an emphasis on diplomatic work, but my father knew better. He thought that my strengths in math and science outweighed that. So, yeah, I got a scholarship to go to Radcliffe from the Cleveland Alumni Group for Radcliffe. And unfortunately, I kind of wasted it. I had misjudged my capability in languages. Harvard Radcliffe language courses were entirely literature courses, and that definitely was not me. So I transferred back to Mather College, Case Western Reserve University, and switched into sciences, majoring in chemistry with minors in biology and math. And with summer school, I actually got through in 3 years with the credits I had gotten at Radcliffe. So it was useful because I decided I wanted to go on to graduate school. I didn't want to do medicine, practice medicine, as I had been urged to do by my family physician and good friend, but that wasn't me. But I liked the idea of medical sciences and medical research.
Well, it's lucky for us that you.
Well, thank you.
So you decided to do a PhD in physiology, and
Yeah,
and
well,
then how did you find your way to physiology first, and then to Paul Dell's lab?
okay. So I was at Case Western Reserve University doing graduate work, and physiology seemed the most broad of all basic science departments. And so I enrolled there, and I got a USPHS predoctoral fellowship, which I had from 1956 to 1961. And it leaned heavily toward endocrinology, since George Sayers, who was head of the department, was an endocrinologist, one of the top people in ACTH at the time. There was an opening in Gordon Farrell's lab, and so that's where I went and studied aldosterone regulation. And my thesis in 1961 was on the central nervous system regulation of aldosterone secretion. And then I stayed on for a couple of years as a postdoc there, where we isolated the aldosterone stimulating factor, adrenoglomerulotropin, which was actually a metabolite of melatonin. And so that was interesting. But, well, I wanted to go to Europe. I'd been there for my honeymoon in 1960.
Go back to Paris.
And enjoyed it very much, and wanted to go back. So I looked at several labs that were doing neurophysiology in terms of the reticular formation and the organization of the brainstem, with input into the hypothalamus and the limbic forebrain system. And the labs that were doing that, well, I looked at Marussi's lab in Italy, but Paris was more intriguing. I had some relatives there. So we went to Paris in 1963, and I joined Paul Dell's laboratory.
That must have been an exciting time.
It was, although it was still post-war in Europe, and I know paper towels were hard to come by, for one thing. I had to have a procedure done in the dental. Well, I was in Paul Dell's lab in the Hôpital Henri Roussel, which was a psychiatric hospital in Paris, and it was a great lab. It had visitors all the time, European scientists, international scientists. Paul Dell had just become head of the International Brain Research Organization, which was sponsored by UNESCO. So it was really a very good lab. And so I had a procedure done there in the psychiatric hospital, and the dentists were wiping their hands on the communal towel. I decided, no, this was not for me. And fortunately, a cousin of mine was a doctor nearby, and he referred me to the dentist in his building. But anyway, we enjoyed Paris, its museums, its all its activities, art galleries, entertainment. And my husband was fortunate enough to be able to be to continue his graduate studies in nuclear physics at the Orsay campus of the University of Paris. At the same time, he, with the encouragement of my cousin, immersed himself in Art Nouveau and Art Deco, and that eventually formed the basis of his successful art gallery in LA. So, and then we also honed our fluency in French for future translators of scientific literature.
Oh.
So it was a good time.
It was interesting you came full circle back to Paris and your grandmother and mother.
Well, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yes.
And for me, you were always very stylish. And
Oh, well,
so
thank
I think you still have that gene.
Okay.
Then you ended up at UCLA. That was after a brief stop at Case Western, right? And then Baylor.
Well, okay.
So Baylor seems a bit out of place, but I know why you ended up there.
Yeah. Well, okay, so in Paris, in Paul Dell's lab, he had two colleagues, lifelong colleagues, Dr. Martha Bonvalet, with whom I worked, and Dr. Andre Hugelin, and they were among the pioneers in our understanding of the role of the central nervous system in visceral, somatic, autonomic, and even endocrine function. So I continued Martha Bonvalet's work during the year and a half that I was with her on the organization of the reticular activating system. We used the CAT and encephal isolé preparation. We had recording electrodes, stimulating electrodes, and this gave me a very good background in neurophysiology that would then enable me to pursue, use that for neuroendocrinology. Mm-hmm. And then while in Paris, I was supported by American Heart Association. I was one of their advanced research fellows. And then I was appointed assistant professor in physiology at Case Western Reserve. So I came back to Cleveland in January of 65. And I assumed teaching responsibilities there. Well, in the meantime, Gordon Farrell had moved to Houston, and he invited me to join his enterprise there. It was at the Houston State Psychiatric Institute, the Texas Research Institute for Mental Sciences of the Houston State Psychiatric Institute. And it was also affiliated with the Department of Psychiatry at Baylor. Well, there was very good neuroendocrinology going on at Baylor. Mm-hmm. Roger Guillemin was in physiology, and Vaughn Critchlow was in anatomy. And I chose to affiliate with anatomy as my other affiliation besides the Research Institute, and started teaching anatomical sciences. Mm-hmm. So
show that anatomy and physiology are close to each other and connected. And you continued that at UCLA, and
yeah, I was in the anatomy. We were in anatomy department at the time.
Anatomy,
I worked with
cell biology.
Yeah, well then it became anatomy and cell biology, but I think you had left already.
Yeah.
And now it's neurobiology.
That's right.
And we no longer teach anatomy as such. That's done by pathology and lab medicine. Right. Teaches gross anatomy. We teach neuroanatomy, and so I still do neuroanatomy for medical students.
So when I knew you were teaching mostly neuroanatomy, and then you chaired the gross anatomy course.
Yeah.
After that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was fun.
So UCLA at that time had to have been very exciting because it was building.
Well, so we put in 2 years in Houston. It was not one of our favorite places, I'm sorry to say. And my husband and I decided that we could improve upon our physical and cultural environment by moving. And he definitely wanted to go west. Okay. And fortunately, an appointment opened up that was very close, very similar to what I was doing, and that was in the anatomy department at UCLA, in Dr. Sawyer's lab, mm-hmm. which became the Laboratory of Neuroendocrinology. So I was in the Brain Research Institute, Department of Anatomy, Laboratory of Neuroendocrinology, and took over Dr. Schlecher's Dr. Margaret Susher's NIH grant, which was very similar to my NIH grant at the time. Both grants were on the the central nervous system, reticular formation, stress, HPA axis, and went up to 1969. The only problem with that position, I didn't realize quite at the time, was that it was soft money. And I managed to survive 50 years of getting grant support at UCLA, which these
you did very
days
well
is,
for yourself.
which
Soft
these
money.
days I think it's a bit harder to, would be
Yeah.
harder to do. It was the right time to do that. But it was not sensible to take a soft money position. And colleagues around me who were in similar soft money positions, male colleagues, were advanced. And I could not achieve that. But I survived anyway.
Yeah. But that's, besides Charles Sawyer and others, the Brain Research Institute was forming, the Scheibels were there at that time.
That's right, the Scheibel. Arnie was there until just recently,
Is that right? Yeah.
teaching graduate student neuro.
Magoon was there.
Magoon was there, exactly.
So I remember my first time at UCLA, how excited I was to meet all these legends, and you'd already been there for
A few
decade
years,
before.
yeah.
This gets into your research areas and expertise and how you were influenced, people that influenced you in making these decisions.
Well, obviously joining UCLA and being grant supported to study the brainstem, the reticular formation, its organization, stress response, that's what we were doing. We sidetracked a bit. In fact, we were into circadian rhythms and sleep, which was part of your work.
Right.
And another colleague, Roger Gorski, was right next door.
Yeah.
We had a very active group, Sawyer's, our neuroendocrinology group.
Yeah,
So
the bigger group was very
it
exciting.
was a very stimulating place. And that's,
And teaching was exciting too.
Yeah.
We did this team teaching.
it was.
We were true colleagues in the teaching efforts
Yeah.
all the time. Yeah. I know that you had people working in your lab. I remember Beryl and Branch, and sometimes these are the people that really help and influence your life as well.
Well, Beryl was my research associate. She started with me in Houston, and she followed me. We brought her to UCLA. She was with me until 1991, 25 years. And since then, for the last 25 years, I've had another research associate, Delia Teo. They both were chemists, and they were very instrumental in continuing our work, enabling us to do radioimmunoassays for steroids, ELISAs for cytokines. They were just very helpful. And of course, our doctoral students and our postdocs were influenced our work to a great extent.
And there were a series of really great graduate students and postdocs that came through.
Yeah, there were. In terms of graduate students, well, we had yourself, then we had Robert Cassidy,
Yeah.
who is since retired from Texas Tech, I believe, as an anatomist. And we had postdocs like, in the early years, Robert Lorenz, had another graduate student, Barbara Bush-Turner. And, but in later years, after I joined the VA in 1979, I kept my lab going at UCLA, where we did the chemical analyses. We did the animal experimentation at the VA in Dr. Art Uweiler's lab. And that was just after you left, I believe. I joined the VA as an awardee, as one of the first alcohol research awardees. This was a program that was started by Dr. Marcus Rothschild at the VA, and I was fortunate enough to get on that. And there I had some outstanding colleagues that I still interact with through my colleague in psychology, Dr. John Liebeskind, who unfortunately has passed away. But I managed to get, he sent for the neuroendocrine part of their studies, he sent all his graduate students and postdocs to me. Mm-hmm. So it was a joint effort, and we had a great time. We had, I think while you were there, we had Hanan Frank.
Yes, yes.
Who...
and you always had the international people coming.
And I had Langveri.
Langveri and Olena Ranacliffe.
Olena Ranacliffe,
yeah.
who's up in Oregon.
Yeah.
So
it was a constant stream of people, and they would rotate among the three labs.
Yeah.
All influenced each other. It was great. The other thing I remember, well, your work on fetal alcohol exposure is very exciting.
Well, okay, so when I joined the VA, I was an alcohol research awardee. And that changed or focused the direction of my research for the past 30 plus years, first on fetal alcohol exposure or prenatal alcohol exposure, and we did adult alcoholism, and more recently we've been doing traumatic brain injury. Yeah. So those are our three areas.
In terms of impact, though, it's had a tremendous impact.
I think our fetal alcohol work had the most, because we were among the first to be able to, who showed that fetal alcohol exposure, which actually, in terms of a syndrome, had been known since 1968 in terms of its cranial dysmorphologies, its facial dysmorphologies, its effects on the CNS and on cognitive and behavioral function. In 1981, we provided the first demonstration that fetal alcohol exposure, which I'll call FAE, exerts persistent effects on adult responsiveness to alcohol. But this was also the first indication that fetal alcohol exposure can produce hyper-responsiveness of the HPA axis and to other stressors in adult rats, such as we subsequently showed with graduate student Dr. Linda Nelson. I don't know. You knew her. And Dr. Norio Coca, who was a pharmacologist in the pharmacology department. So, yes, and that was followed up clinically. It had been shown that, subsequently, that children of maternal, of mothers who drank during pregnancy had similar problems with their stress responsiveness. We also showed, in conjunction with Drs. Dean Norman and Mei-Ping Chang at the VA, and Dr. Francesco Chiapelli at UCLA, you may have known him, we were among the first to demonstrate the effects of prenatal alcohol exposure, inducing impairment of T-cell development and function in the offspring. And again, clinical studies showed increased infection in fetal alcohol exposed offspring.
So you really at the forefront of a lot of work that goes on today that shows early exposure during fetal development and early postnatal development can influence subsequent physiological responses.
I think so.
Yeah, I know so.
Of course, it's being pursued more at the molecular level now, and techniques which I didn't, I decided not to retrain into those, and I didn't have the students and postdocs who could bring my lab into that,
Yeah.
nor the equipment.
But the physiological observations,
Yes,
you were amongst the first to do that.
yeah.
Yeah. Although it's not on here, I'm going to ask you about the Winter Conference on Brain Research. I just
Oh, good.
read a history of that conference, and you're featured very prominently
Oh,
in that.
I'll have to look for that. I'm glad they recognized our.
Oh, absolutely, they did. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that conference started in 1968, first in California at their Tahoe Conference Center, and then we moved to Snowmass at Aspen. And it was started by a group of us neuroscientists from the anatomy department, from the med school, and others from psychology and the Neuropsychiatric Institute, and other people, Al Bruner from up north. So it was a joint, and John Sweat from Irvine. So it really was a joint effort to be able to ski during the daytime, have scientific sessions in the morning before we went skiing, and in the afternoon, evening after skiing. And it was a great conference. It still continues today. It's got over 500 scientists. It didn't have 500 back in those days. Well, in the third year, I had been a ski groupie in Cleveland, and I brought in the people from LA, and I had gotten them discounts on fares and tickets and whatnot. And I mentioned that at the business meeting. And the guy said, we don't want to do that. If you want to do that, you do it. So I said, okay, I'll do it. And my husband Ken joined me in that effort. We learned from hotel managers, resort managers, how to write contracts. We did everything except the program. We site selected, and so it was a great conference. And then in '79, we in fact started the European Winter Conference on Brain Research, which is also still going today. We did it until 1994, and I still ski, but not scientifically.
It was a great meeting because it brought people together not only to have fun, but also to participate
Yes.
and share their knowledge.
And in fact, at one of our early conferences in Snowmass, we heard John Denver.
Yes.
Did you ever go to those?
I went to many.
You went to many, okay.
I helped you at that time run slides and
Yeah,
projectors.
well, that's right. I used all the people in the lab.
Starving graduate student, that's how I got through.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was fun. And it helped me meet a lot of people.
Yes.
The
it was very good.
networking was very important. And you've been able to do that through the years very well.
Well, we did it for 25 years, and of course, since we had in fact established a company, my husband and I, Scientific Conference Planners. So yes, we did it for peers in neurochemistry, other disciplines, Parkinson's disease, and
So,
it's been fun.
yeah, absolutely. You can have fun doing science.
That's right.
You don't have to not have fun and just be stoic all the time.
No,
Yeah. So you mentioned this earlier, that you had to find your own funding, you soft money, but you were very successful in doing that. So what was the secret of your success? And
I have no idea. I think luck. Well, perseverance and luck.
Yeah.
And being in the right place at the right time. Excuse me. I think these days, I'm still on a study section, on a VA study section on brain injury. It's much harder to get funding. It takes at least 2 tries, and after 2 tries, you have to change the scope so you can reapply because the NIH has a limit, the VA has a limit. I don't know, but I was fortunate, and yes, I
don't
made
think
it.
it's luck at all. I think it's
What?
I think it reflects your talents. And
Well, okay.
but what advice would you give to younger people now that are starting off?
Well, I think they have to persevere and not be upset with setbacks
Yeah.
and just resubmit. Fortunately, I didn't have to resubmit that often until recent years.
Yeah.
But it's just a matter of persevering and enjoying it because it is an enjoyable profession. It's a good career, and it's an enjoyable profession. It allows you to travel, to meet other people, and where else could you be doing that?
No, it's a wonderful life, actually.
Yeah.
So I remember the advice you gave me. You probably don't remember this.
No.
When I had my first papers submitted, and I would get the criticisms back, and I was never very good at taking criticism, and you told me not to take it personally.
That's right.
They were doing their job, and I still teach my students that too.
Yeah, that certainly is part of the lesson, not to be personally affected by that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And especially these days with the grant reviews and the limitations on funding.
Yeah.
It's,
Well, here we are at the EB meeting, but it used to be the FASEB meeting.
that's
Do
right.
you remember the first time that you
Yeah.
went to?
I've been going to FASEB meetings ever since I was a graduate student. One of my first meetings was 1958. It was in Philadelphia. It was FASEB.
Okay.
And I gave a paper on aldosterone regulation. And in the front row were 3 famous physiologists, Sawyer, Magoon, and I'm not sure if the third one, I don't remember who the third one was, but it may have been Pappenheimer,
Okay.
whom I subsequently interviewed with for American Heart Association.
Okay.
But yeah, the meetings were enjoyable, and I went to those. I went to the Endocrine Society meetings, went to AAAS, became a fellow, and have enjoyed meetings all the time.
You've been a member of the APS for a long time.
Yes,
So do you remember what year you first joined the APS?
63,
63.
more than 40 years.
That's right.
I don't know if well, you would know if it has changed. I have, unfortunately, neuroscience split off, and I was
Yeah.
more involved with the Society for Neuroscience than APS as such. But in terms of how meetings have changed, well, there were no poster sessions in those days. It was all oral presentations, and
Yeah. I still remember the stress of having to give an oral presentation for the
yes.
first time. Do you remember that? Or
Oh, yes, it's still stressful
still
for
stressful,
me.
yes. No matter how many times you do it, it's still
That's
stressful.
right.
Yeah. This says, what advice would you give students who are starting off today? You said perseverance.
I think perseverance and
You've always had a passion for science, so, and I think that's the other thing. You can demonstrate it to your students that you're
Yeah.
still excited and curious. And I
Yes.
know you've done that.
inquisitiveness,
That's right.
trying to learn from others, from your colleagues, see what they're doing, collaborate.
Yeah.
These are all important.
So the area of neuroendocrinology, when you first started off, was fairly small, but expanding. It was, now it encompasses psychiatry and psychology.
Well, then it morphed into neuroendocrine immunology.
Yes.
So
And we keep rediscovering things, that psychology plays a role in physiology, and
yeah,
that the two interact with each other.
yeah, and well, at the beginning, there was Jeffrey Harris and his colleagues, and they demonstrated the importance of hormonal regulation from the hypothalamus. And then there was Guillemot, Shalley, and finally CRF was isolated and characterized by Wiley Vale. That was 1981. So yes, neuroendocrinology grew and became a well-established field. The interest in my department now is more reproductive neuroendocrinology rather than stress. And we dabbled a bit in that, but we primarily focused on stress.
Mm-hmm.
But the neuroimmunology is important, and we made some of the first observations in that with my colleague Razir Mia, with whom I've had binational grants between Israel and the US. He's a professor of psychology at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and we showed that the response to an endotoxin, an infectious agent like lipopolysaccharide, and the cytokines that it releases cause a hypersensitivity in terms of HPA axis. And we focused a lot on temperature regulation, and that the hypothermic response that alcohol produces was enhanced in response to these agents. So there was an important connection between the endocrine system, the mind, the brain, the immune system, both in the forward direction in terms of hormonal influences and downstream in terms of cytokines. So again, an offshoot of some of the older areas.
Yeah. So I was always impressed by you. You weren't siloed by any set thing that you should be restricted to, but you ventured out and tried to find ways of communicating across these boundaries and true integration.
Well, I think that was encouraged by Sawyer's lab.
Absolutely.
And then by my colleagues in psychology, John Libeskind and his fellows. And that's very important.
It helped to have the Brain Research Institute there that
That's
brought
right.
these people together, and the Neuropsychiatric Institute.
And people like Harper and Sleep.
That's right.
Yeah,
And people working in epilepsy and all these different areas
that's right.
that could go and talk to each other just down the hall. That's what I remember. That's what influenced me.
Well, it's the same and it isn't these days. The BRI, the Brain Research Institute, has actually moved across the street into its own building.
Yeah.
And a few of us are left in the old Center for the Health Sciences.
Okay.
And the focus of our departments has changed to where, in terms of basic research, it's more at the cellular and molecular level. And people like Harper were able to do translational research, which I unfortunately have not been able to do as much of, but that's kind of the focus these days, is to be able to apply basic to clinical and vice versa.
Well, I
All
think
the-
you have influenced that with your work in the fetal alcohol exposure.
Yeah,
certainly
and our
influenced.
traumatic brain injury work. Yeah.
So I think we all do translational work of some sort. We
Yes.
write our grants that way. And,
Well, that's what we have to do, yeah,
yeah.
in order to survive now.
So I asked my students to give me an elevator pitch that you have just a few minutes to explain your research career. How would you do that? And just someone that is not a non-scientist and you're trying to tell them what your career has been about.
Okay, well, you have to start with graduate studies and then try and globalize. Go abroad somewhere. In my time, it was France was good, but now there are many places which are excellent, and get that experience. And then come back, set up a lab, and find an area of interest and get students, postdocs in, and learn from them, expand, and take it from there.
Constant exposure to new ideas. Excellent. And it's been a pleasure having this honor, really an honor for me to interview you.
Well, I certainly enjoyed it,
Yeah.
and thank you so much.
Thank you.